After the shootout, town offered a cowboy an Apache woman, but he chose another path. The town of Red Hollow had once been a place where children ran freely in the streets and shop doors stayed open until late evening. But in recent months, something had changed. Fear had slowly settled over the town like dust that refused to wash away. Travelers brought stories of robberies along the trails. Ranchers spoke in low voices about cattle going missing. Shopkeepers began closing their doors before sunset. No one said it openly, but everyone felt it. Trouble was close. It was late afternoon when Daniel Mercer rode into Red Hollow. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the wooden buildings. His horse moved at a steady, tired pace, hooves tapping softly against the dry ground. Daniel himself looked like any other cowboy passing through. His hat was worn from years under the sun. His boots carried the marks of long roads. He did not ride with pride or with fear. He simply rode like a man used to moving from place to place. Daniel had not planned to stop in Red Hollow. He had meant to ride farther before dark, but his horse needed water, and he needed rest. He guided the animal toward the trough near the general store and dismounted slowly. His movements were calm and careful, as if he carried no hurry in his bones. A few townspeople watched him from a distance. In those days, strangers were not greeted with smiles. They were measured with quiet eyes and cautious thoughts. Daniel felt the weight of those stares, but he did not react. He had grown used to suspicion. In places touched by trouble, trust was never given quickly. He stepped into the general store. A small bell above the door rang softly. Inside, the air smelled of flour, leather, and coffee beans. The storekeeper, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, looked up from behind the counter. "Evening," Daniel said politely. "Evening," the storekeeper replied, studying him. Daniel purchased a small sack of dried meat, some bread, and a tin cup. He asked where he might find a stable for his horse. The storekeeper hesitated for a moment before giving directions. "You passing through?" the man asked. "Yes, sir," Daniel answered. "Just need a night's rest." The storekeeper nodded but did not seem fully convinced. Before Daniel could say more, a loud bang echoed from outside. The sound was sharp and sudden. It did not belong to the peaceful rhythm of town life. Another loud crack followed. Then shouting. "They're back," he whispered. Yeah. Daniel did not ask who they were. He could hear boots pounding against wooden boards and the sound of frightened voices. Without panic, he stepped back outside. A group of armed riders had stormed into the center of town. Their horses kicked up clouds of dust. They shouted orders at the townspeople, demanding money and supplies. One of them fired into the air, the noise splitting through the quiet evening. People scrambled for cover. A woman pulled her daughter behind a wagon. A shop door slammed shut. The sheriff stood near the jailhouse, clearly outnumbered and unsure of what to do. Daniel remained near the edge of the boardwalk, observing. This was not his town. These were not his people. He could walk away. He could mount his horse and ride until the sounds faded behind him. But then he saw something that held him in place. A young boy, no older than 10, stood frozen in the middle of the street. Fear had locked his legs. He stared at the chaos around him, unable to move. One of the riders turned his horse sharply, nearly charging straight toward the child. Daniel's heartbeat slowed in a strange way. When danger appears suddenly, some men panic. Others think clearly. Daniel had faced difficult moments before. I understood that hesitation could cost more than action. He stepped forward. "Get inside," he shouted toward the boy. The child did not react. Daniel moved quickly across the dirt road. The riders noticed him now. One of them raised his weapon and aimed in his direction. Daniel did not shout again. He did not make a speech. He acted. The next few moments felt stretched as if time itself had grown heavy. Dust swirled. Horses neighed loudly. The air filled with sharp sounds that echoed between the buildings. Daniel positioned himself between the riders and the boy. He guided the child toward safety, pushing him gently behind a wooden water barrel near the boardwalk. "Stay down," Daniel said firmly. The riders had not expected resistance. They had grown used to easy fear. One of them called out angrily, demanding that Daniel step aside. Daniel did not respond with words. The sheriff, seeing someone stand up at last, found a spark of courage within himself. He took cover behind a post and joined the defense. A shopkeeper peeked from behind a window holding an old rifle with shaking hands. The confrontation unfolded quickly but felt endless to those watching. Daniel moved with steady focus. He did not chase the riders recklessly. He kept his position strong, protecting the center of town and preventing them from advancing further. One of the attackers lost control of his horse and fell hard into the dust. Another pulled back, surprised by the resistance. The leader of the group shouted angrily, realizing this raid would not go as smoothly as planned. The townspeople, seeing that the riders were not unstoppable, slowly began to act. A rancher grabbed his own firearm and joined the sheriff. A second shopkeeper secured his door and helped move frightened families into safer places. The attackers, now facing unexpected opposition, began to retreat. They fired a few last shots into the air, trying to maintain some sense of power, but their confidence had cracked. Within minutes, they turned their horses and rode out of town, disappearing into the fading light. Silence followed. It was not a peaceful silence. It was heavy and stunned. Dust settled slowly back to the ground. A baby began to cry somewhere behind a building. The boy Daniel had protected peeked out from behind the barrel, his face pale but unharmed. Daniel stood still, scanning the road to make sure the riders were truly gone. Only when he was certain did he lower his guard. The sheriff approached him cautiously. "You didn't have to do that," the older man said quietly. Daniel brushed dust from his sleeve. "Couldn't let them hurt the child," he replied simply. The boy's mother rushed forward and pulled her son into her arms. She looked at Daniel with eyes full of gratitude but also disbelief. To her, he was still a stranger. Word spread quickly through Red Hollow. The quiet cowboy who had arrived for rest had stood against the raiders when no one else could. By the time the sun fully disappeared, small groups of townspeople had gathered in the street, speaking his name in low voices. Daniel did not seek praise. He walked back to the trough, checked on his horse, and made sure the animal was calm. His hands moved gently along the horse's neck, steady and reassuring. Inside, he felt no pride, only relief that the child was safe. The storekeeper stepped out of his shop and approached him. His earlier suspicion had softened. "You saved more than one life today," he said. Daniel shook his head slightly. "Town saved itself," he answered. "Just needed someone to step first." But deep down, everyone knew that without his decision to act, the evening might have ended very differently. As lanterns were lit along the boardwalk, Red Hollow looked the same as it had that morning. The buildings still stood, the wind still moved through the streets, yet something had shifted. Fear no longer owned the town completely. And Daniel Mercer, who had only planned to stay one night, had unknowingly changed the course of its story. The morning after the attack felt different from any other morning Red Hollow had known in months. The sun rose slowly over the rooftops, casting a warm golden light across the dusty street. For the first time in a long while, people stepped out of their homes without the same heavy fear in their eyes. The air still carried the memory of what had happened, but there was also something new, hope. He woke before sunrise, as he always did, and stepped outside the small room the storekeeper had offered him for the night. He moved quietly, not wanting attention. His habit was simple: ride in, do what needed to be done, and ride out before roots could form beneath his boots. But as he reached the stable, he noticed something unusual. The town was already awake. Men were gathered near the sheriff's office. Women stood in small groups whispering. Even children, who had been hidden inside the night before, now peeked curiously from behind fences. When Daniel began saddling his horse, the storekeeper approached him. "You might want to wait," the man said gently. "For what?" Daniel asked, tightening the strap. "The town wants to speak with you." He was not a man who enjoyed public gatherings. He preferred quiet roads and open skies. Still, it would be rude to leave without hearing them. He nodded once and followed the storekeeper toward the center of town. A small crowd had formed. The sheriff stood at the front, hat in hand. His usually serious face now held a look of deep respect. "Folks," the sheriff began, clearing his throat, "we owe this man more than simple thanks." Murmurs of agreement moved through the crowd. Daniel stood with his hands resting loosely at his sides. He did not step forward or raise his head proudly. He simply listened. The sheriff continued, "Last night, when fear froze us in place, he stood firm. He protected our children and helped us find our courage again. We can't let him leave without showing what that means to us." A rancher stepped forward with a small pouch of coins. A shopkeeper offered free supplies. Another man promised a fresh horse if Daniel wished to trade. Daniel felt uncomfortable. He appreciated kindness, but he had not acted for reward. "I'm grateful," he said calmly, "but I did what anyone should have done." Some nodded, but others shook their heads. They knew not everyone would have stepped forward the way he had. Then the mayor, an older man with silver hair and thoughtful eyes, raised his hand for silence. "There is something else," he said slowly. The crowd parted slightly as a small group approached from the far end of the street. They were members of a nearby Apache community who had long lived on the outskirts of town. Relations between the town and the tribe had not always been smooth. There had been misunderstandings in the past, moments of distrust, and years of distance. But trade and shared land had kept them connected in quiet ways. Among them walked a young woman named Ayana. She moved with calm confidence. Her long dark hair was tied neatly behind her shoulders. Her posture was straight, her expression steady. She was known among her people for her wisdom beyond her years. She helped teach children. She spoke clearly during community gatherings. She was respected not because she demanded it, but because she earned it. Daniel noticed her immediately, not because of beauty alone, but because of the quiet strength in her presence. The mayor continued speaking. Last night showed us something important. We are stronger when we stand together. For too long, this town and our neighbors have lived side by side, but not truly united. He paused, choosing his words carefully. We believe it is time to build a stronger bond, and we believe this brave cowboy could be part of that future. Daniel felt confusion rise within him. The mayor looked toward Ayana and then back at Daniel. As a sign of gratitude and unity, we would like to offer a marriage between you and Ayana, a joining of two paths, a symbol of peace. A sudden silence spread across the crowd. Daniel blinked slowly. For a moment, he wondered if he had misunderstood. Marriage? He had expected perhaps land, money, or supplies. Not this. He glanced toward Ayana. Her face remained calm, but her eyes held something thoughtful, almost questioning. Whispers began spreading among the townspeople. Some smiled at the idea, imagining celebrations in harmony. Others looked unsure but said nothing. Daniel took a slow breath. His thoughts felt heavy. He respected traditions. He understood that in some communities marriage was seen as a powerful bridge between groups. But he also believed something simple and firm. Marriage was not a reward. The sheriff stepped closer to him and spoke quietly. It's a great honor, son. Daniel nodded politely, but his mind was not settled. Ayana finally stepped forward herself. Her voice was steady and clear. I would like to speak, she said. The crowd quieted immediately. She looked first at her own people, then at the townsfolk. I understand the intention behind this offer. Unity is important. Respect is important, but marriage is not only a symbol. It is a life. Her words carried weight. Daniel felt a deep sense of respect for her courage to speak openly. The mayor looked slightly uncomfortable, but allowed her to continue. I have dreams, Ayana said gently. I wish to continue teaching our children. I wish to help improve understanding between our communities. Those goals matter to me. Her eyes then shifted briefly toward Daniel. There was no anger in her gaze, only honesty. And I do not know this man, she added calmly. He acted with bravery, and I respect that. But respect alone does not decide a future. The air felt tense but thoughtful. Daniel finally found his voice. May I speak as well? The sheriff nodded. Daniel stepped forward, removing his hat out of respect. I am honored by your gratitude. Truly. But I never meant to become part of anyone's plan. I helped because it was right. He turned slightly toward Ayana, but kept his tone respectful. No person should be offered like a prize. And no life should be decided as payment for courage. A few people shifted uncomfortably. The idea had seemed noble to them at first. Now, under careful words, it felt more complicated. Daniel continued, marriage should begin with choice, understanding, and time, not with applause. Ayana's lips curved slightly, not in a smile of humor, but in agreement. The mayor lowered his head, thinking deeply. He had meant well. Many of them had. They had wanted to show appreciation in the strongest way they knew, but perhaps they had rushed ahead of deeper thought. An elder from Ayana's community stepped forward. His voice was calm and wise. Unity cannot be forced, he said softly. It must grow. Those simple words seemed to settle over the crowd like gentle rain. The tension slowly eased. Daniel looked at Ayana again. This time, there was mutual understanding in their eyes. They were both being placed at the center of something larger than themselves. Yet neither wished to be controlled by it. The mayor finally spoke. Perhaps we allowed our excitement to guide us too quickly. We only wish to honor bravery and build peace. And peace can still be built, Ayana replied, but in many ways not just one. The conversation shifted after that. Instead of speaking about marriage, they began discussing cooperation, shared protection, shared trade, shared education. The focus moved from two individuals to two communities. Daniel felt relief wash over him. The weight on his chest lifted. As the meeting ended, people approached him again, but this time their words were quieter, more thoughtful. They thanked him not only for his actions during the attack, but for his honesty now. Later that afternoon, Daniel found himself standing near the edge of town looking out toward the hills. He heard soft footsteps behind him. It was Ayanna. For a moment, they stood in silence, watching the wind move through the tall grass. "You spoke with respect," she said finally. "So, did you?" Daniel replied. She nodded. "Many would have accepted quickly. Many might have," he agreed. "But I don't believe in taking what isn't freely given." They did not speak long. There was no sudden romance, no dramatic promise, only understanding. As the sun began to set once more, Daniel realized his stay in Red Hollow would be longer than one night, but not for the reasons anyone had first imagined. The town had tried to offer him a future as a reward. Instead, he had chosen something else. He had chosen respect. The days after the town meeting felt quieter on the outside, but inside many hearts, thoughts were moving quickly. Red Hollow returned to its normal rhythm. Shop doors opened early. Ranchers rode out at sunrise. Children played in the street again. But every conversation somehow found its way back to the same topic, the cowboy and the choice he had made. Daniel Mercer stayed longer than he had planned. At first he told himself it was only for his horse to rest, but deep down he knew something else was holding him there. The town stood at a turning point. People were thinking differently. And somehow he had become part of that moment. He spent his mornings helping repair small damages left behind from the raid. A broken fence here, a shattered window there. He never asked for payment. When someone tried to hand him coins, he politely refused. "Use it for your town," he would say. The sheriff began asking Daniel for advice about strengthening town safety. They walked together along the outer edges of Red Hollow, discussing where lanterns should be placed at night and how to organize a proper watch system. Daniel did not pretend to know everything. He simply shared what he had learned from years on the road. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Ayanna continued her own work. She gathered children beneath a large cottonwood tree and taught them reading, numbers, and stories from their history. She spoke about pride, identity, and learning from the past without being trapped by it. But even while she taught, her mind often wandered back to that morning in the town square. She had not been angry about the offer. What unsettled her was the idea that her life could be discussed so easily without her voice being heard first. She understood the town's desire for unity. She believed in peace, but peace built without respect would never last. One afternoon, as the wind carried dust across the open land, Daniel found himself riding toward the edge of the Apache settlement. He had not planned the visit carefully. He simply felt it was time to speak openly, away from crowds and expectations. When he arrived, he dismounted and waited respectfully. He did not step forward without invitation. After a short while, Ayanna approached. "You are far from the main street," she said calmly. "I suppose I am," Daniel replied with a small smile. They stood facing each other, both aware that their names had been linked in whispers across town. Yet there was no awkwardness between them, only curiosity. "I wanted to ask you something," Daniel said. "Not about the offer, about you." Ayanna raised an eyebrow slightly, amused. "About me?" "Yes," he answered. "You spoke about your dreams that morning. Teaching, building understanding. I'd like to know more." For a moment she studied him, trying to see his true intention. She saw no pride in his posture, no hidden plan in his eyes. So she began to speak. She told him how she had grown up watching elders struggle to communicate with town leaders because of language differences. She had seen misunderstandings grow into distance. She believed education could build bridges that speeches alone never could. "Our children should know their own stories," she said. "But they should also understand the world beyond our land. Knowledge is not betrayal. It is strength." Daniel listened carefully. He had never thought deeply about such things before. His life had been simple: ride, work, move on. But her words carried weight. "And what about you?" she asked suddenly. "What are you searching for?" Daniel looked out toward the horizon before answering. "I used to think I was searching for nothing, just moving from job to job, but lately I feel like I'm searching for a place where standing still makes sense." "Does Red Hollow feel like that place?" she asked. He considered the question honestly. "I'm not sure yet." They walked slowly along the edge of the settlement, talking about small things and large ones, about responsibility, about freedom, about how choices shape not only one life but many. That evening, Daniel returned to town with a mind heavier than before, not with worry, but with reflection. Over the next week, tension quietly grew among some townspeople. Not everyone agreed with Daniel's decision to refuse the marriage offer. A few believed he had insulted their gratitude. Others worried that turning down the proposal might weaken the chance for unity. One afternoon, Daniel overheard two men arguing outside the general store. He should have accepted, one man said. It would have solved everything. Nothing is solved by forcing two people together, the other replied. Daniel stepped forward calmly. Gentlemen, he said softly, peace isn't a single event. It's a daily effort. They fell silent. Later that same day, the mayor requested a private conversation with Daniel. Inside the mayor's office, sunlight filtered through thin curtains. The older man sighed deeply. I meant well, he said, but perhaps I acted too quickly. You wanted what was best? Daniel replied. That counts. But now the town is divided, the mayor admitted. Then maybe the division was already there, Daniel said gently. The offer just brought it into the open. The mayor leaned back in his chair, thinking carefully. And what would you suggest? Daniel hesitated. He was not a leader by title, but sometimes leadership is simply speaking truth at the right moment. Start smaller, he said. Hold shared meetings. Invite their elders to speak. Let both sides listen. Real unity grows from understanding, not ceremony. The mayor nodded slowly. Meanwhile, Ayanana faced her own conversations. Some members of her community questioned why she had not accepted the offer. They reminded her that alliances could protect their future. She listened respectfully, then answered with calm strength. Protection built without choice is another form of control. I will not trade one for the other. Even those who disagreed could not ignore her conviction. As days passed, Daniel and Ayana met a few more times. Not secretly, not romantically, but openly. They spoke like two individuals trying to understand the path ahead. One evening, as they watched the sunset from a hill overlooking the town, Ayana asked, Do you regret refusing? Now, do you? She smiled faintly. No. The sky turned orange, then purple. Lights began to flicker on below. You know, Daniel said quietly, if we had accepted just to please everyone, people would have celebrated for a week. Then what? Then they would expect us to carry the weight of their hopes, she finished. He nodded. That shared understanding deepened the respect between them. Red Hollow slowly began organizing shared gatherings between the town and the Apache community. Instead of one grand gesture, they started with small conversations, shared meals, joint patrols for safety, simple cooperation. It was not dramatic. It was not fast. But it was real. Daniel watched these changes with quiet satisfaction. Yet inside him, another question grew stronger. Was he meant to stay and become part of this new chapter? Or was his role only to spark it and then move on? He found himself walking the streets at night, thinking deeply. He cared about the people now. He admired Ayena's strength. He respected the sheriff. He even appreciated the storekeeper's cautious kindness. But he had spent years living without ties. Roots were not easy for him. One late night he stood alone outside the stable looking at his horse. The animal shifted calmly, used to long journeys. You're ready to move whenever I am, Daniel whispered. Yet for the first time in years, he did not feel completely certain about leaving. The choice before him was no longer about accepting or refusing an offer. It was about identity. Was he simply a traveler who passed through towns during difficult moments? Or could he become someone who helped build something lasting? At the same time, Ayana faced her own crossroads. Her dreams of education were expanding. She had been invited to speak at larger gatherings. Her influence was growing. Both of them stood at the edge of new paths, and neither wanted their future decided by anyone else. The weight of choice rested not on pressure but on possibility. And sometimes, possibility feels heavier than obligation. Red Hollow had survived the raid. It had survived disagreement. Now it stood waiting to see what Daniel Mercer and Ayana would decide next, not as symbols, not as rewards, but as individuals shaping their own destinies. The air in Red Hollow felt different again as the next town gathering approached. Word had spread that the mayor wanted to speak once more about unity between the town and the Apache community. This time, however, there was no talk of grand gestures or symbolic marriages. People sensed that something more thoughtful was coming. Daniel had spent the morning repairing a section of fence near the edge of town. He worked slowly, his hands steady, but his thoughts were far away. He knew that whatever was said at the meeting could shape the future of the town. He also knew that many people still looked at him as the man whose choice had changed everything. He did not enjoy being at the center of attention. He preferred simple actions over long speeches, but sometimes silence could be mistaken for agreement. And Daniel had learned that when something truly mattered, it was better to speak clearly. As evening fell, lanterns were lit around the town square. The sheriff stood near the front, keeping order as families gathered. Members of the Apache community arrived as well, walking calmly into the shared space. The mood was not tense, but it was serious. Ayanna stood with her people, her posture straight, her expression calm. She looked confident, not because she wanted to lead the moment, but because she was no longer afraid of it. The mayor stepped forward first. His voice carried across the square, steady but humble. "We have learned something important over the past few days," he began. "Good intentions are not always enough. We must listen before we act. We must ask before we decide. We wanted unity, but we tried to build it too quickly. We forgot that true peace grows slowly, like a tree. It needs strong roots." Many in the crowd nodded. Then he turned toward Daniel. "Would you care to speak?" A quiet wave of whispers moved through the gathering. Daniel stepped forward, removing his hat once again. He took a moment before speaking, not because he was nervous, but because he wanted his words to be careful and honest. "I came to this town by chance," he said. "I did not ride here looking to become part of your story, but sometimes life places you where you are needed." He looked around at the faces watching him, the shopkeepers, the ranchers, the children, the elders. "When I stood up during the attack, I did it because it was right, not because I expected anything in return." He turned slightly toward Ayanna and her community. "And when the offer was made, I understood the kindness behind it, but I could not accept it. Not because I felt insulted, not because I lacked respect, but because a person is not a reward." The square grew silent. "A marriage," Daniel continued, "should begin with choice, with understanding, with time. It should not be used to fix fear or prove gratitude." Ayanna stepped forward then, standing beside him, not behind him, not in his shadow. "I agree," she said calmly. "Unity is not created by tying two lives together without their full will. It is created when two communities learn to trust one another. ? Her voice carried strength without anger. She continued, "We want peace. We want cooperation. But we also want dignity. Every person deserves a right to shape their own path." The sheriff cleared his throat and added, "We all made mistakes in the past. Maybe this is our chance to do better. If not marriage, then what? How do we show we stand together?" This was the question many had been thinking, but had not spoken aloud. Daniel answered carefully, "We stand together by protecting each other, by trading fairly, by learning from one another, by inviting each other into decisions before they are made." Ayanna nodded. "We can create shared councils. We can teach both languages to our children. We can celebrate together without forcing lives together." An elder from the Apache community stepped forward. His voice was soft but firm. "For many years we have watched each other from a distance. Fear grows in distance, respect grows in closeness." The mayor took a deep breath. "Then let us begin there. Not with a symbol, but with daily actions." The meeting did not end in applause. It ended in something better: understanding. People began speaking in smaller groups, discussing practical steps, joint patrols, shared markets, open classrooms where children from both communities could learn side by side. Daniel stepped away from the center once the discussion shifted. He did not need praise. He felt relief instead, relief that the focus had moved from him and Ayanna to something larger and more lasting. Later that night, he found himself sitting alone on the steps outside the stable. The stars above Red Hollow were bright and clear. Footsteps approached quietly. "You handled that well," Ayanna said, sitting beside him. "So did you," he replied. They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the night sounds. Distant laughter, horses shifting in their stalls, the wind brushing against wooden walls. "Do you ever wonder," Ayanna asked softly, "what would have happened if you had simply said yes?" The town would have celebrated. There would have been music and food. "And after that?" "After that," he said, "we would have carried a weight that was never truly ours. Expectation can be heavier than conflict." He glanced at her. "You could have stayed silent that day." Many would have expected it. Silence would have been easier, but easier is not always right. Daniel respected that deeply. Over the next few weeks, the changes they had discussed began to take shape. Small joint meetings were held. The sheriff and Apache leaders organized shared patrol routes. Ayanna started teaching a few town children alongside her own students. At first, parents were unsure, but curiosity slowly replaced hesitation. Daniel helped where he could. He repaired wagons, trained young men in defensive skills, and offered advice when asked. Yet he noticed something important. The town no longer depended on him alone. They were learning to stand on their own. One afternoon, the sheriff approached Daniel with a thoughtful expression. "You planning to stay?" he asked. Daniel looked across the town. Children were playing near the well. Merchants were trading calmly. Members of both communities were speaking together without tension. "I don't know," Daniel admitted honestly. "This place feels different now." "That's because it is," the sheriff replied, "and you helped change it." Daniel shook his head slightly. "I may have started something, but they are the ones building it." That evening, Daniel rode out alone to the hill overlooking Red Hollow. He wanted a clear view, a quiet space to think. He realized something important as he watched the lanterns glow below. The bravest choice he had made was not during the attack. It was not standing in the street. It was not facing danger. The bravest choice had been refusing something that seemed honorable but did not feel right. It is easy to accept praise. It is harder to protect principles. Down in the town, Ayanna stood beneath the cottonwood tree with her students. She was explaining how strong bridges are built slowly, one careful piece at a time. Neither of them had chosen the easy path, but they had chosen the honest one, and in doing so they had shown Red Hollow something far more powerful than a symbolic union. They had shown that respect is stronger than reward, and that sometimes saying no is the beginning of something greater than anyone first imagined.